This is Tron, one of the premier combo decks in Pauper. If you like decks that make a lot of mana, if you like artifact decks, or if you like decks with really high synergy, then this deck is a good option for you to play. This deck features, obviously, the Tron lands, mine, power plant, and tower, and also features a combo kill. And before dissecting the rest of the deck in detail, I can just really quickly show you how this combo works. We start by looking at Mirror Retriever, which is a 2-mana artifact creature. When it dies, you return another artifact from your graveyard to your hand. A Mirror Retriever can actually target another Mirror Retriever if you have a second one in your graveyard, so they can return each other. Then you have this card Ashnod's Altar, which allows you to sacrifice your creatures to add exactly 2 mana to your mana pool. 2 mana is the magic number because it allows you to cast a Mirror Retriever. So what you can do is play a Mirror Retriever, sack it for 2 mana, return another Mirror Retriever to your hand, recast the second Mirror Retriever, sack it for 2 mana, return the first Mirror Retriever to your hand, and you can loop those Mirror Retrievers. Now, obviously, this doesn't do anything unless you have some payoff for storming or for casting spells or for things entering the battlefield, and that's where Golem Foundry comes in. Golem Foundry is a 3-mana artifact. When you cast an artifact, you put a charge counter on it, then you can remove 3 charge counters and create a 3/3 colorless Golem. So if you have a Mirror Retriever in hand and graveyard, and Ashnod's Altar in play, and a Golem Foundry in play, you can theoretically make infinite golems. This is one of the primary ways that this deck will win, is by generating this combo. But it isn't the only way it can win. Every win condition does revolve around this card Golem Foundry, but you'll notice a ton of other artifacts in this deck as well, and all these do trigger the Golem Foundry. So you may, in many games that have a lot of interaction, find yourself in a situation where you're just looping a lot of really tiny artifacts, slowly putting charge counters on Golem Foundry, making some arbitrary number of golems between like 5 or 10 and 15, and then slowly beating in on your opponent with golems that way as well. You're not going to win the game without Golem Foundry, but you don't need the combo with Golem Foundry to necessarily win. Now, most lists are playing 4 copies of Mirror Retriever, 4 copies of Golem Foundry, and you can either play 2 or 3 Ashnod's Altar based on your preference. And there's a lot of other cards that go into this deck based on what you want to add in terms of which artifacts and spells you're prioritizing. But starting with the lands, we of course have the 12 Urza lands, and it's very important to get Tron to make this deck function on all cylinders. You of course have a couple spells to assist you in getting Tron, including Expedition Map. Some of your best hands include something like Urza's Mine, Urza's Tower, and Expedition Map, so you can guarantee Tron on turn 3. You also have Crop Rotation as another tutor for your lands, which makes it a lot easier to get Tron, as well as things like Ancient Stirrings to help you dig for your Tron lands, and a lot of redraws with many of these 1-mana artifacts. The other 5 lands you include in your deck are all a little bit of utility. You have the 1 basic Swamp. Black mana is important for about 7 of your spells in this deck. Polluted Mire is another black source, but one that you can also tutor up later with something like Expedition Map as a redraw. A very common line later in the game when you have a ton of mana, but you're trying to find your final combo piece, is using Expedition Map to tutor up Polluted Mire and then cycling it for 2 mana as a redraw. Haunted Fengraf is another utility land that allows you to return a random creature from your graveyard to your hand by sacrificing it, and since your only creature in your deck is basically Mirror Retriever, besides the one of Mirror Kilnsmith, which is a tutor for Mirror Retriever, you're always going to use this card to get a Mirror Retriever. Crystal Grotto is a mana filter land. It lets you add either the green or the black, whatever you need to cast your spell, or red post sideboard. And the scry is also very important too. You sometimes might even tutor this up with your Expedition Map if you need to get a particular color of mana, or even get it with Crop Rotation to get that scry effect. Some people play snow-covered lands, some people play basic forest instead of basic swamp. The differences are very marginal, but these 12 Tron lands you of course have to play, and the Crystal Grottos are also very important as well. At the 1-mana slot, you want to be playing cards that are either filtering your mana or getting towards Tron or getting towards your combo pieces. Expedition Map again is to help you get your final Tron lands. Crop Rotation has a similar effect. Ancient Stirrings is amazing early game to hit your Tron lands, but also great later in the game to hit an irrelevant artifact and set up your combo kill. We also have 4 of Chromatic Star, another artifact that is very useful in filtering your mana to get green or black, as well as to redraw a card, as well as another card that triggers Golem Foundry. Mana filtering is super important in this deck because oftentimes early you're going to be basically playing lands that are all colorless. So cards like Chromatic Star and Wizard's Rockets and Energy Refractor are all extremely important in getting the requisite colors of mana that you need in order to cast your colored spells. It doesn't look like there are that many colored spells in this deck, but there actually are quite a few, with 14 total. You don't want to have too many more than 14 colored spells because your deck is primarily generating colorless mana with Tron. Sometimes you find yourself in a situation where you have a lot of colored spells clogged in your hand and you can't cast them all. So you need to have enough mana filtration mechanisms in your deck for it to function. And you also need enough artifacts in your deck to have an appropriate amount of payoffs for Golem Foundry. So everything that's not an artifact needs to fulfill a very specific and deliberate purpose. Now, of course, this Blood Fountain is also an artifact. Blood Fountain is another very useful one in giving you additional ways to recur your Mirror Retriever. Ancient Stirrings is a colored spell, but it can draw you in to an artifact, or ideally a land. Crop Rotation is going to get you your third Tron piece. Deadly Dispute and Rowan's Grim Search are very important for helping keep the cards flowing. They're both going to give you 2 cards. They're going to help you dig for your combo pieces. Deadly Dispute also gives you a treasure. This is one of the reasons I'm playing basic Swamp in this deck instead of basic Forest. It's oftentimes stronger to have the mana to play the black spell, because a lot of your black spells, and hence the 4 Deadly Disputes, all make a treasure, which you can then use to cast your green spell in your hand. Deadly Dispute and Rowan's Grim Search also have synergy with a lot of other artifacts in the deck. Chromatic Star is so much better than Chromatic Sphere here, specifically because when Chromatic Star is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, regardless of if you're sacrificing it for mana, you still do get to draw a card, which is very useful with these types of effects. Wizard's Rockets does the same thing, and this is why I'm specifically playing this card over Sphere, is partially because it also has synergy with these cards, but also because you can actually generate more than a single colored mana using its effect. This card by itself can generate multiple pips of green and black if you need them. And then the final colored spell is Weather the Storm. This card's going to be really useful in buying you extra turns, basically time walking your opponent. You're going to have lots of these mini combo turns where you cast 4 or 5 spells, you're setting up for your next big turn, and then you're going to try to end the turn with Weather the Storm. Maybe you gain 15 life or 21 life, or enough where it's going to buy you a full turn against some of those more aggressive decks that you're playing against. So your most common plays on turn 1 with a colorless mana are going to be Chromatic Star, Wizard Rockets, ideally Expedition Map is the best one, and then you also have the card Candy Trail, which I have been extremely impressed with. Now, when I first saw this card, I didn't think it was that good, but Scrying 2 is extremely important for filtering into the draws that you need to. It's a really good card later as well, once you get to like turn 4 or 5 plus when you're digging for something specific. The gaining 3 life and drawing the card is also super relevant. The life gain is super important against the more aggressive decks. The Candy Trail in conjunction with Weather of the Storm oftentimes will give you enough extra life gain to help you cross the finish line. So I wound up going from 2 Candy Trail all the way up to 3 and then eventually to 4 total in my deck. Not everyone plays Wizard's Rockets, but I kind of wanted an additional 1-drop I could play on turn 1, and this was the best one that I found, especially because it has good synergy, again, with Deadly Dispute and Rowan's Grim Search. So in conjunction with these 6 black cards, you have very good sacrifices in Chromatic Star, Wizard's Rockets, and also Ichor Wellspring, which not a lot of people are playing either, but it's another card that, similar to Energy Refractor, will draw you a card when it comes into play, and just has really good synergy with all these cards that let you sacrifice artifacts. Speaking of which, another card that is really good with Deadly Dispute and Rowan's Grim Search is Mirror Retriever. Having another way to sacrifice it is very important, and to keep the looping going, to keep putting counters on your Golem Foundry, to keep recurring things, drawing more cards, filtering into your combo kill. Mirror Retriever is really just an all-star in this deck. Mirror Kilnsmith, you can play 2 of this card. I'm playing 1. It's a card I boarded out the second copy of a lot post Sideboard. It's just another copy of Mirror Retriever, so you effectively have 5 in your deck. Keep in mind, you can also sacrifice the Mirror Kilnsmith to the Ashnod's Altar, as well as any of your Golems. So you may find yourself in a situation where you can generate 6, 8, 10 charge counters on a Golem Foundry. You can unload them to make golems, and then you can sacrifice those golems to make mana and continue casting spells and have a really big storm turn. Even if you're not comboing off for the win, you can gain a lot of life with Weather the Storm or set up your combo for the following turn. So this is basically the core of the deck. Oftentimes you can combo kill by turn 5 or 6 pretty consistently. The fastest I would say you can probably realistically combo is turn 4. You're probably not going to get to do it on turn 3 very often, although it is technically possible with a super nutty draw. Let's take a look at the sideboard really quick, and remember, because we filter so many different mana colors, we're not really restricted to black and green. We can play a lot of red spells. Cards like Ancient Grudge are extremely useful against affinity decks. You can play it against the Mirror, and you can play this really against anything else that is running a lot of artifacts. Many of these cards will be self-explanatory. Scattershot, Breath Weapon, and Krark Clan Shaman are going to be good against decks that are running a lot of creatures. Breath Weapon hits a lot of the threats that come out of Delver. Krark Clan Shaman is going to hit a lot of things that are going wide with maybe smaller creatures that are not flying. Scattershot can help actually take down even slightly larger creatures because you're storming off a lot, so you could stack all these points of damage onto one creature. Fengraf Marauder and Weather the Storm are additional cards that are going to allow you to gain life against those decks that are really taxing your life total. Weather the Storm is obviously very clutch against decks like like Burn. And Fengraf Marauder is also actually going to come in handy in decks where you need an additional layer of threats. Sometimes the Golem Foundry isn't going to help you necessarily cross the finish line by itself, so having just a 5/5 body can be pretty strong against a lot of other decks out there as well, in working in conjunction with some golems to win the game. Serene Heart is good against decks like Boggles, and just anything else that's playing auras. I could see running this against Ponza as well. Nihil Spellbomb is good against graveyard decks. I will play this card in the mirror match. I will play this card against stuff that's maybe delving for Gurmag Angler or trying to set up something like Tolarian Terror. Just remember that the blue decks are going to be presenting a lot of counter magic, and you want to try to present things that give them a reason to counter your spells. So something like Spellbomb is another thing that you might try to encourage them to use their counter spell on. Some other cards you can consider that I'm not playing, if you want a different 1-drop, maybe over like Wizard's Rockets, you could play something like Chromatic Sphere. If you want alternate win conditions, you can play something like Makeshift Munitions, which is a way you can sacrifice your artifacts to ping creatures or players. I haven't actually played with this card, so I'm not sure how good it is, but there's not a clear consensus on whether it's a must-have in your deck or not. You could also go for something like Reckless Fireweaver, which pings your opponent every time you play an artifact. A really common issue this deck runs into is just playing it online in general is kind of a rough experience. Sometimes when you present the combo, your opponents won't actually concede you, and obviously they're not obligated to concede to you, but I've definitely had matches that have gone to time even when I was clearly winning, because I had to demonstrate my loot multiple times. Maybe my opponent was able to deal with my board state of golems, and then I had to generate a board state of golems a second time and had to do that multiple times within one game. So if you're asking for my recommendation on whether or not you should play this deck, if you want to play it online, just a word of caution that a lot of people will not concede to you when you demonstrate the combo, and that will cost you some matches. On paper, this deck is sweet. However, you just have to remember to manage all your triggers properly. Magic Online is going to take care of this for you, but when you're playing on paper with Golem Foundry in play, plus you might also have a Fengraf Marauder in play, so when you're playing artifacts and when artifacts are leaving, you have to make sure you remember all those triggers, and you also have to keep track of your storm count for Weather the Storm or things like Scattershot, and then you have to keep track of all the different colors of mana you have when you're floating things with stuff like Wizard's Rockets and your treasure tokens and your blood tokens. It can be a lot. So just keep that in mind if you're looking to pick up the deck. I think this deck is sweet. It's a lot of fun to play. Although the deck is playing Tron lands, it is very different from Ephemerate Tron. That deck is trying to fog out your opponent and then win over the long game with a bunch of chip damage by being the control deck and just attacking with Mole Drifters or killing you with Roiling Vortex. Tron is an artifact-heavy combo deck that is trying to win with a massive board of infinite Golem tokens. If you enjoyed the deck tech, consider subscribing and then check out this other Magic the Gathering video. It's also great on some other deck. Thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.